All right, this is guide lecture number 10. Greetings. I bring you blessings of God, my dear friends. It is so enormously difficult. Sorry, I have to get comfortable here. It is so enormously difficult for man to understand what it really means to say that heaven or hell is within man. I am going to reread that. Greetings. I bring you blessings of God, my dear friends. It is so enormously difficult for man to understand what it really means to say that heaven or hell is within man. Man usually thinks this is an emotional state, thus something unreal, something that cannot be touched, because for man, reality is that which he can see and touch. His emotional state he can neither see nor touch. And when we tell you that thoughts and feelings are forms, then it is already a little easier for you to understand that these forms build the respective spheres. The landscape, the surrounding, and the landscape, the surrounding, the clothing, whatever it is, they are in harmony or disharmony. It depends, with all the many, many in-between levels. But this still does not answer the question how all this can be within, because man thinks there is no room inside for these landscapes and those spheres. As difficult as it is to make this clear, I will try to give you an outline so that my words will help you to gain further recognition in this area. Just as the time element is so entirely different on earth from that in the true reality of spirit, so it is with dimension, or if you prefer, with geographical denotations, above, below, right, left, etc., i.e., the dimensions which you are able to comprehend on earth. When man sheds his body, he goes inside into the spiritual spheres, because the whole universe is within man, factually. I'm going to read that again. When man sheds his body, he goes inside into the spiritual spheres, because the whole universe is within man, factually. And perhaps you will better understand when I give you an example, as deficient as it has to be. Imagine you have a telescope and you look into it from the wrong side, and everything becomes very small. But this tiny picture is still the same that you say exists in reality. But now you will object, how can the entire universe, even if the dimensions are different, be in every man, the one universe? This is my reply. Your earthly world is, as a matter of fact, not the true reality. Also, not in the spiritually translated or symbolical sense, but it is only a reflex, the reflected image, a projection of the true reality, the true reality. The body, which engages the spirit, brings the separation. But as soon as this separating wall is removed when the body is shed, the entire universe, which is in each one of you, unites. Of course, assuming that the individual being has reached the level to belong to the sphere where there are no separating walls. The lower sphere here and there, the more separating factors. I give you here only a vague outline. Words cannot fully convey. Words cannot convey fully. They have their own limitation, and may they be a guide for your own meditation as to what it means, heaven or hell and everything in between is within you. It is not an emotional state only, as you always think, just a mood or something abstract. What you consider abstract is concrete in the spiritual, everything. So what is without form to you in the spiritual has a form, but no density. And it may still be difficult for you to understand that the matter which you can touch is only a reflected image or a reflex of the universe which is in each soul in its entirety. But this difficulty can perhaps to a certain degree be overcome in meditation. Question. Are there any questions about this subject? Question. Yes. As an idea of association, I would like to ask, how is it with the atom, which nobody can see? But scientifically, it is held that the atom is the smallest thing that can be comprehended by the brain. There is nothing smaller. Therefore, it was said, if the atom could be divided, one would get to know the secrets of the universe. Answer. And as you have well perceived, fission of the atom is somewhere related to the idea which I have tried to describe here, although the example lacks completeness. An atom or nuclear physicist can comprehend it still better because he knows exactly what is meant with proportions of dimension. To call the atom the smallest is of course human. It is the smallest unitary constituent which you are able to comprehend, but in the spiritual, the smallest is at the same time the largest. This is almost impossible for you to understand, but you have sensed that there is an interplay. And when it is the theory that by dividing the atom the secrets of the universe can be found, then it exactly means or senses that all this opens the door a little, or it lifts the veil to some degree. Religious concepts generally imply that everything is on the outside, hell below, heaven above, etc. But when you read in the Holy Scriptures, the heavenly kingdom is within you. Just to give you one example, then man thinks of only an emotional state. There is a contradiction, and nuclear science sheds light on what I have discussed here, that everything is one and the same, i.e., that the emotional state at the same time is a sphere or spheres within which, excuse me, let me read that again as I get comfortable. It's kind of hard on the squishy bed. The heavenly kingdom is within you. Okay. There is a contradiction, and nuclear science sheds some light on what I have discussed here, that everything is one and the same, i.e., that the emotional state at the same time is a sphere or spheres which are within man. Every spirit being, when it has reached a certain level of height, purification, and cleansing, is capable of disintegrating, merging with the divine currents. So if I may say so, or being completely absorbed, but then recontracting these fluid threads to being a form and gestalt with, however, so little density that other beings who have not yet reached that level cannot perceive this form, although it is form and gestalt. An echo of feeling can be experienced by every human being. When you are extremely happy, you may sense a longing of dissolving, not only in love unison, but also in other outstanding experiences. When the soul is very uplifted, God is very close, in whichever way this may happen, be it with nature, music, meditation, or simply when God's breath has touched man. But then you do feel the limitation of the body, and you might wish to burst open and merge with this current, dissolve in it. And you may never have thought it in these words, but if you think about it now, you will be able to confirm that once in a while, such feelings have been experienced. The more impurity is in the soul, and by the impure I do not mean faults and weaknesses, but also fears, sick currents, the more fear to dissolve that is in man at the same time, despite the longing. The more man has grown spiritually, the less he will resist the dissolving. Some schools of philosophy and recognition have comprehended this, and they state that this alone is the final state, based on their experience and comprehension. But this is human error. This disintegrating and dissolving exists, however, without losing individuality or consciousness of the I. But as I have said before, these beings will always recontract these fluid threads, thus changing from the state of pure beingness to the state of action. But the state of action needs complete harmonious beingness. And since God is creator, thus doer, this also takes place with him. which creates and creates, recontracts again and again for this purpose in the purest and the most perfect form, that element of God which is and operates, therefore disperses, merges again. And these realities of spirit are almost beyond man's comprehension. My words can only be helping agents. They alone can never make you understand this or give you the recognition, but they may be the spark which suddenly kindles a luminous flame in you. And perhaps, my friend, this may answer a question which you have brought before me at a previous occasion, which I did not answer at the time. Do you understand? Question: yes. This is quite clear in the Indian philosophy as far as we can understand it. Answer from the guide: yes. My words have at the same time also answered a contradiction which exists in human concepts. And as to the subject monism versus dualism, those who have the God experience in beingness, in dissolving, think that this is the only and the final truth. But those who have the God experience in the other way, God as form in his creative element, also believe this to be the final truth, thus the contradiction. Therefore, I also said both are right. It is a fact that each aspect of God thus must be beingness, but not always. At times this beingness can also again be dissolved, not arbitrarily, but in the rhythm of the law, and as I have explained it with regard to all higher beings. But all these aspects of God are personalities in the sense I have tried to outline here. Question: is this what breathing in and breathing out, the prana, what being connected with our own breathing in a certain rhythm means? Answer: quite right. Here you can make connection with the cosmic rhythm. Question: therefore prana and breathing, the most essential functions of life. Answer: right. Much more can be found and recognized when you meditate on these words. And now, my dear ones, since there are many questions to learn from, I will continue today with answering questions. Question: is it, according to the guide, desirable for us here in the Western Hemisphere to meditate on the drop and on the iceberg, or on the iceberg and the water as recommended in the Indian teaching? Or is this not good for us here in the West? Answer: that cannot be generalized. It depends on the individual case. In these areas, you never can say this or that. There are cases where it could be key for someone. In other instances, if the recommended Indian teaching would be given to someone who is not on this level or of a different character, where it would go into quite a different line, then it would not help in the right way. Intuition, inspiration have to be used. Question: maybe for the relaxation purpose which is needed. Answer: yes, quite right. It depends what the problems of the individual are. Don't meditate schematically, but see where and what the problems are, the inner blocks, the faults, the weaknesses. They always result in the main problems. Question: those who, according to astrology, are the earthy types may be able to take it better than the water or the fiery types, or where the horoscope indicates too much air or water. It might not be good. Is that correct? Is that right? Answer: yes. Question: may I ask the following question? It is the common concept in teaching that incarnations alternate between male-female body, i.e. certain women go through incarnations as a man the next time or so, and I believe the medium has heard that the sex does not change. May I ask for clarification? Answer: there is a slight misunderstanding. I have said that once in a while there are cases where such changes take place, but I have also said that fundamentally a being is either male or female, and therefore, generally speaking, incarnations are in that sex which is the being's, so to speak, nature. This is interesting during these days. But there are cases where such change has to take place several times, and I would like to give the following explanation for it. You all know that one day the duality parts unite and become one being. And this happens only after the necessity of incarnation ceases, sometimes much later, where the female and the male element become one. Now it is ultimately so. Therefore, it must also have been so that before the fall, these united beings existed. The fall is a split, a fission, a separation from a whole, which not only happens in the split, but originally from the whole, from God, and subsequently also in many further splits. And this explains the animal, the vegetable, the mineral kingdoms. Their other splits continued further. This is only as a remark to complete the explanation. It has nothing really to do with your question. So as to your question, imagine that this unified duality being resembles a ball. So let me read it again. As to your question, imagine that this united duality being resembles a ball. This ball is composed of male, female elements, as everything in creation is male or female. There is the male principle in God, and this is the positive element, the creative, the active, the doing. And this corresponds to what I say in today's lecture. When God recontracts to form in order to create, then the male principle operates. The female principle, the negative element, negative is not to be seen as an evaluation here, but the negative element is the dissolving one, which slowly and continuously builds, grows that which is in nature, motherliness, not the creative, but the ever-being principle that affects and is. Both principles are found in all manifestations of creation of infinite variety, thus also in the united duality being, having both male and female pole. So when God has created the united duality being, then both are in perfection, each in his own way. And therefore it is not right that the male takes over at the same time that the female functions, and conversely. Now, I will try to explain why the male concepts are contradictory about this. What I now say is a picture, so don't take it literally because I cannot express it differently. Otherwise, you can't imagine it, and I can't bring the right words. So imagine a ball. On one side is the positive pole, i.e. the male principle, and on the other side is the negative pole, i.e. the female principle, united. Both operate in complete harmony. And when the split took place, the two poles were not always, quite rarely, cut in the center, because the split was the result of the separation from God. And this is chaos, which therefore was not part of God's order. Thus the split is not a work of order. Thus the split may have varied with the individual being, and there are cases where the split more or less separated the male from the female pole, while in other cases the split was quite arbitrary. Now, in the regressive return to God, this balance must be established. That which belongs to the male principle and fell on the female side in the split must incarnate in the opposite side to equalize. Therefore, the more disorderly the split occurred, the more changing incarnations are needed. So if each of you would know all of your own previous incarnations, then you would know how many male and how many female incarnations there were, and you would also know how the split was with each one different. However, although such changes in one case frequently, in others less often, take place, each being fundamentally belongs either to the male or the female principle, thus has more of one or the other in its nature. And it would be absurd if the healthy and harmonious female principle would have to change to the male principle. But these principles are divine, and both are perfect in their own way. Question: is it not necessary that each human being on his path of development must go through the experience of both sexes? Answer: no, not necessarily. Suppose there would be such an exact split, then it would not be necessary. Question: and there are beings which have this exact split? Answer: hardly, very rarely. But as I said, there are splits which are nearly exact, less disorderly than in others, and then there is relatively little deviation and thus less need for equalization in this particular respect. But if man thinks it is necessary to gain experiences in both sexes, then I say no. When you meditate this profoundly, you will realize that experience in the spiritual for growth and perfection has nothing to do with being man or woman. Basically, each one will have an inner feeling what he essentially really is. Development leads to perfection in his own way, and those who have to go through an incarnation in this exchange, i.e., when not incarnated in the original sex, they feel or sense it somehow, when such awareness will be awakened in meditation. Of course, experience must be collected. It is, however, not so that the male element must turn female or conversely. That is human misunderstanding. As God is perfect in his male and female principle, each in its own, each one operating in manner and function absolutely harmoniously. Thus it is with all other beings. Harmony and experience must, during the course of development, be collected or better attained in order to restore beingness in divine perfection. Question: does the separation between male and female continue in the incarnation cycle, or is there androgen uniting in the spiritual? Answer: in the spiritual, there is uniting. It must be that way. Question: but only after there is no more need for earth incarnation? Question: yes, only then. In other words, question: in other words, only for those who have overcome the incarnation cycle? Answer: quite right. Quite right. As long as incarnations are necessary, this uniting cannot take place in this way, in the spiritual way. Question: may I ask a very occult question? I have thought about it a lot. It is connected with the denying of Makama that the split was made in the northern constellation of Aquila, Eagle. Answer: it is parallel. There have been given many hints in the entire creation. Question: you said that our reality is only the reflected image of the true reality. I cannot find my way through this. When we touch, for instance, a tree, there is the bark. That is real to us. Somehow I do not understand what you mean, and I am not that far yet. Answer: perhaps you can discuss it later on, and that may help you to gain a little more understanding. It is very difficult to explain this and also understand it. If you cannot yet comprehend it today, that does not matter. It does not yet have so much bearing. Later on, in 1 to 2 to 5 years, it may suddenly dawn on you. You will sense or feel what it is meant with. You will sense or feel what is meant with it. Man comes hardly closer to it, but then my words will have a different impact. Of course, what you touch is reality, at least it seems so to you. And when you touch a mirror, it is also real. You feel the mirror. But let us assume you do not know that the being is warm-blooded as it feels when you really touch it. Then you would think that touching the mirror reflected image would be touching the real person. Remotely similar is that which I have tried to explain. Do you get an inkling? There is nothing for you to compare with because you do not know how in that reality, which you do not consciously comprehend, it feels, it looks, it sounds, whatever it may be. Therefore, that which you are able to touch, see, and hear seems to you the final criterion in absence of comparison. Question: when a person is incarnated as a female and feels quite masculine, is that a sin against the incarnation, or is it a sign for what you have just explained? Answer: I should not say sin, but when, for instance, a woman rebels against her womanhood, then there is an offense in it, even though only emotionally, because in such rebellion is at the same time rebellion against God, against creation, against destiny. This should therefore be healed, because a human being can only find perfect happiness by affirming the given life fully and wholly to fulfill as that being into which he was born. This does not only refer to the subject, but to everything. Therefore, the first step should be defined as calling, his destiny, which on this path is easily possible. When man does not walk the path of his destiny, even if he is successful and does a lot of good, he will always be a little unhappy inside. He will always have problems and feel unfulfilled. I am very sorry to say that man usually does not draw the right consequences from this feeling of unhappiness, which actually is a message from the innermost core. They ascribe this feeling of unhappiness to many outside factors. They listen to everything but the inner message. Therefore, if a human being is unhappy somewhat, somehow, he should realize that he did not yet fulfill his task as far as it would be possible. When there are any problems, it does not make sense to eliminate just the outer problems alone. The roots have to be found. Man should find out in which areas the calling is met and where not. This is the only averter of evil, averter of evil, or the strength consumer, or of the strength consuming inner dissatisfaction. Question: in which way then can someone, as mentioned above, fulfill real womanhood or real manhood when the split of which was spoken previously was not so well done, and thus the man has to live without being responsible for it and without being able to change it against his or her will? Let me read that again. In which way, then, can someone, as mentioned above, fulfill real womanhood or real manhood when the split of which was spoken previously was not so well done, and thus man has to live without being responsible for it and without being able to change it against his or her true beingness? If a woman is so masculine that she cannot go through her womanhood, or only with great difficulty? Answer: that is a good question, but I will make one correction. What is wrong in your question is to suppose without being responsible for it. That does not exist. But this is just on the side. Everything is man's own responsibility, regardless whether the wrongdoing is recognized or not. It may have happened just recently in the present life, and the memory still, it may have happened just recently in this present life, and the memory still exists, or it happened way back in other lives that the consciousness is not yet aware of, but man's spirit knows it, even if he does not reveal it. That is immaterial. As far as the question itself is concerned, I say you know, and your psychology has realized it, that in each man there are female elements, and in each woman there are male elements. Even in astrology, that is so. So, as our friend here will confirm, a man thus may be born under a female sign and yet be perfectly healthy man. And the same holds true for the woman who is born under a male sign. As far as the psychological angle is concerned, or it is as follows. If a human being is healthily integrated, which means perfect fulfillment of destination paired with the maximum of personal development, then these tendencies of the opposite sex elements in him will be no obstacle for the true unfoldment of his masculinity or her femininity, but all will further and perfect the personality to the best possible extent. If, for example, a male element bothers the woman, then it is because she doesn't live her life fully in the spiritual sense. But if she develops, the same male element in her will be a helping factor, and it will change to something positive and good. And the more she develops, the more harmonious each soul current and tendency will adjust, and everything leads to better integration. You see, again, everything depends on the free will of man. The decisive factor is not what man is born with, advantages and disadvantages, positive or negative from the human viewpoint, but what man does, what he makes of it. If he walks the spiritual path most intensely, then any disturbing element outside or within will become advantageous. If man does not go the spiritual path, then everything, even advantages, will become disadvantageous and problems. In such latter case, the male element in the woman would become a discrepancy, leading to great conflicts, and the discrepancy would make her an inharmonious being. So it depends on the free will for personal development exclusively. Do you understand? Question: yes, I believe it is a continuous polarization. Answer: yes, but it is more yet. Question: that is a compliment? Answer: yes, complementing. You know you can. Any element taken as such is neutral. When you utilize the element, it can be advantageous or disadvantageous effect, and it may be formed this way or that way. It can be harmful or benign, and thus it is with these parts. If, for instance, the male element burdens the woman, then on her path of development, she should work on this through purification, discipline, unfoldment, healing, and integration, which can only be started by a decision of free will. She has the choice to do nothing against it, or to walk this path of light and purify the soul. It is not accident or arbitrary when the split is so irregular, but it was also by free will, i.e., doing nothing, which at first seems so convenient. Therefore, regression back to God is always the overcoming of difficulties which were self-created originally. Question. This would constitute an indirect answer to the problem of career woman. Answer. Yes. Question. I would like to ask something in this area. I did not know that this question would be asked, but the problem bothers me. Is it at all possible that there could be a technical error in incarnation? Answer. No. No. That is impossible. Question. But I have seen human beings who, in the best sense of the word, were 100% feminine, although in a male body. And this has nothing to do with homosexuality. That they were, in addition, homosexual does not interest me because I see in them only the spiritual. The physical is not interesting. Answer. Such a case may often be a karmic effect, which has nothing to do with the subject we discussed, at least only indirectly. When a human being in a previous incarnation has committed offenses against his own sex, and I don't need to go into details, then that woman has to be born as a man. Then that must be born, or vice versa. But they did not suffer. They were very happy. Karma must not always involve suffering. Karma must not involve always only suffering. Karma is also good, and it means